Well, hey there and welcome back to Heimler's History. It is AP exam season and I've been publishing a bunch of videos to help you get ready. In the last video, I showed you my process for writing a DBQ for AP World History, but you didn't think I was going to leave my APUSH students behind, did you? You were so crazy. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to write a DBQ from beginning to end for AP US History. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, well then let's get to it. So if you're not already familiar with the rubric for the DBQ, you're going to need to start there. And this video right here will make all your dreams come true. In this video, I'm going to assume that you know all the scoring requirements of the essay, and so what I'm going to do here is to take you through the process that I would go through from the moment I first saw the prompt to the moment I start writing. In other words, I'm going to show you how I plan for the DBQ. And a good plan almost always means a good essay, so do not hurry through this. Get these principles firmly shoved into your brain fold so you can do it without thinking. Now, I'm going to be using this planning guide right here that I created. If you want to follow along with me, you can get that in the link in the description. Also, it's going to be helpful if you have the DBQ itself, which you can also find at the link in the description below. And as I said in the other video, this isn't the only way to do it. Maybe it's not even the best way, but this is the process that makes sense to me. And so if you know a better way to do it, a method that makes more sense to you, well then you do that. But for the rest of you, I just recommend doing what I'm about to show you. Now, to be clear, you can't have this DBQ worksheet on the exam, so it's good to practice a lot and get the principles down so it's second nature by the time you sit for the exam. All right, let's get into the DBQ. All right, let's begin by looking at the prompt. Evaluate the relative importance of different causes for the expanding role of the United States in the world in the period from 1865 to 1910. Okay, so now I'm going to go over to my worksheet and just make sure I understand everything they're asking me in the prompt, because that's the first step to really nailing your essay. Evaluate the relative importance of different causes. What's the historical thinking skill? It is causation. But the causes of what? What is it asking me about? In this case, it's the expanding role of the United States in the world. And let's not forget, it's not just asking me about the causes of the expanding role of the United States in the world, it's asking me about the relative importance of the different causes. In other words, there's going to be some causes that are more important, some causes that are less important, and it's up to me as the one writing this essay to establish which of them are more important, which are less important. Okay, and now the time period, just to make sure I don't forget where I'm writing, and that is 1865 to 1910. Okay, I think I have a pretty good understanding of what they're asking me to do in this prompt, and so now let's go back and read the documents. All right, now I'm not going to read all these documents to you. You might just want to pause this and read them for yourself and take a few minutes to do that, but I'm just going to show you the key things that I'm taking out of these documents. So in document 1, the first thing I see is that what we're about to read is a treaty. And after reading the whole thing, it really is just an explanation of Russia ceding their North American territory to the United States. So this is a document about land cession. Okay, moving on to document 2. It's from Josiah Strong from a book called Our Country, Its Possible Future and Present Crisis, 1885. First of all, I notice that he invokes the divine to talk about the Anglo-Saxon race. He talks about the final competition of races for which the Anglo-Saxon is being schooled. Then he has a great opinion of the Anglo-Saxon race, this race of unequaled energy. He uses words like majesty. And if Josiah Strong was to have his way, the Anglo-Saxon race will spread itself over the earth. Now, this document also seems to have something to do with lands as well. The lands of the earth are limited, he says, and that's what the competition of the races is going to be about. So maybe this is another document about land, but the race thing really dominates this, so I'm going to put it in that category. I'm just going to write over here, racial destiny. Because remember, what we're trying to do is understand these documents in the context of the prompt, and the prompt is about the expanding role of the United States in the world. So the first document has something to do with the gaining of land. The second one has to do with like racial superiority. So that's where we're headed. Okay, document number 3 is by Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan, The Interest of America in Sea Power, Present and Future. And the first thing he mentions is the importance of distant markets. He mentions the American influence in places like the Caribbean and Central America, but then he mentions a problem. We have not the Navy, and what is worse, we are not willing to have the Navy. So this tells me there's something about economics going on here and the relationship of having a good Navy to protecting economic interests. So I'm going to put economics right here. All these words that I'm writing off to the side are going to help me later with my grouping. Okay, document number 4 has President William McKinley serving Uncle Sam, and he's saying, well, I hardly know which to take first in reference to all of these places up here. And the only other thing I want to do on this document is just to notice this date, 1898. That makes me think of something, and hopefully it makes you think of something else as well, and that's going to help me later in my sourcing. It makes me think of the Spanish-American War. It's probable that I'm later going to use that for sourcing, so I just want to make a note of it so I don't forget. get.
Document 5 is from John Hay, who is the Secretary of State, and this is the second open door note in 1900. And what I see here is that he wants to protect the economic interests of the United States in China, but there's a problem which he calls the condition at Peking, and it's one of virtual anarchy. And what he wants to secure is impartial trade with all parts of the Chinese empire.
So again, that tells me that what we're looking at is a document that is economic in nature.
I'm going to write right here, economics.
But then if I'm really on my game, I'm going to source this for historical context, because this condition at Peking is actually the Boxer Rebellion. And so I just want to make a note of that there so I can use it later. All right, the next document comes from Puck, which I want to notice is a satirical magazine, which means whatever I'm about to see in this picture is a criticism of the reality that it depicts. And so here we have Uncle Sam, and he's holding a soldier right here and a teacher right here. And over here, he's talking to native Filipinos. I see that right here. And he says to them, you can take your choice. I have plenty of both. So really all I want to take from this document is that Uncle Sam seems to be offering the Filipinos the option to either be conquered by force or by assimilation. And this seems to fit into the racial category. So I just want to note that there and move on. And then finally, we need to look at document 7. This is from President Theodore Roosevelt, his 4th annual message to Congress in 1904. Okay, now this is an interesting document because he says it is not true that the United States feels any land hunger, which actually directly contradicts what we saw in that image in document 4. So I'm just going to note that contradiction in my mind because that could be interesting to work in for complexity. All Roosevelt wants is to see the neighboring countries stable, orderly, and prosperous. And if they're not, that ultimately means that it will require intervention by some civilized nation and the exercise of an international police power. Now, hopefully, if you've been studying, that's going to remind you of something. What this is called is the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, so I'm just going to write that here to remind myself to use it for sourcing. Okay, so that's just a quick interpretation of all the documents. Now, what I've done is in my document section of my worksheet, I've just given a brief 1 or 2 sentence, 1 or 2 phrase description of each document. That's not everything in the documents, but it is enough to jog my memory and give me a brief idea of what they're about. So now what I want to do before we move on to the back is I just want to fill out a few of these other boxes just to make sure I get all my points. I put this outside evidence column right here, not because you need that many pieces of outside evidence, you actually only need 1, but because this is the way it works for me. For me, as I'm reading the documents, that will often jog my memory, as you saw before when we were dealing with the documents, of something that I could use for outside evidence. And so when I was reading about Russia ceding territory to the US, that reminded me of what it was called, namely Seward's Folly. That might be something I can expand upon for outside evidence, or maybe I could use it for sourcing, but I'm just going to put it in this box for now. And then when I was reading document 2, what I really thought about was Frederick Jackson Turner's frontier thesis. So I'm just making a note right now of what I thought of when I read the documents, and I will choose which one I'm going to use later. So now let's go to the sourcing section. And when I was reading document 2, that made me think of the historical context of social Darwinism. And then as I mentioned, as I was reading document 4, that reminded me of the historical context of the Spanish-American War. And then when I was reading document 5, again, historical context, that made me think of the Boxer Rebellion. All right, so that's everything I need to do for this front section. Let's flip it over and keep working. The next thing I want to work on is the grouping of the documents. And the reason why we do this, do not skip this. The reason why we do this is so that it sets us up for an argument. We have to group the documents. We don't just want to list the documents one after another, because that is a sure sign that you're not making an argument. So let's group these documents. The groupings that I came up with were as follows. I saw 1, 4, 7, 2 and 6, and then 3 and 5. 1, 4, and 7 seem to have land in common, so I'm going to title that category Manifest Destiny. Documents 2 and 6 seem to have something to do about race, so I'm going to name that race. And then documents 3 and 5 had to do with economics. Okay, so these are 3 causes of the expanding role of the United States in the world. You've got manifest destiny, or hunger for land, you've got race, and you've got economics, okay? So remember, our goal is to evaluate the relative importance of these causes. Which one is the most important? And as I was reading and trying to make sense of the evidence, it seemed to me that the most important cause was going to be land hunger or manifest destiny. And so now I'm just going to write my topic sentences. This is going to be the first sentence of each of my body paragraphs. So my topic sentence would be: the most important cause of the expanding role of the United States in the world is the long-held belief of manifest destiny. And then I would do something similar for the other 2. So once I've got my topic sentences down, I've got my groups established, the thesis kind of almost writes itself. That's why we leave the thesis to this point. So let's do that. Remember, the thesis formula is although X, because A and B, therefore Y. Y is the counter argument, A and B is your specific historical evidence, and Y is your argument. So here's what I'd write. Although racial superiority and the desire for overseas markets were important causes in America's imperialist ventures, because of the sheer amount of land acquisition, including Alaska, Hawaii, and the Philippines, the notion of manifest destiny was the most important cause of the expanding role of the United States from 1865 to 1910. All right, it's not beautiful, it's a little bit clunky, it's not the most elegantly written thing you've ever seen. However, it is complex and it does set me up for an argumentative essay. Okay, now that I have my thesis, I can decide what I want to use to contextualize that argument. That's why the contextualization part is here. So remember, our contextualization has to relate to the argument we're making in our essay. So I'm going to talk about land acquisition, I'm going to talk about race, and I'm going to talk about economics. So I want to contextualize those three things. Again, what I'm about to do is probably more than you need, but just FYI, here's how I would do it. To contextualize land acquisition and manifest destiny, I want to talk about westward expansion. Specifically, I want to mention Oregon, Texas, and the Mexican cession. Then to contextualize the economics argument, I want to talk about Commodore Matthew Perry and his opening of Japan to trade. And then to contextualize the racial issue, I'm thinking of Rudyard Kipling's White Man's Burden. And of course, Kipling was an Englishman, not an American, but that does put it in the larger context of the worldwide colonial ventures of the time. So the last thing I want to do in this section is I want to make sure to force myself to connect these to my argument. So I'm going to make sure to tie this to land acquisition, trade and economics, and racial dominance. Okay, now the last thing I need to do in all of this is make sure I write down what I'm going to use for my evidence beyond the documents. Now, I gave myself a couple of options on the other side of the page when we talked about the documents. I'm going to choose Frederick Jackson Turner's Frontier Thesis. So in my essay, I'm going to name the frontier thesis. I'm going to tell what it is. And the last thing I want to do is make sure I connect it to the larger argument that I'm making. So in this case, the larger argument is that Turner argued that expansion into other territories is basically baked into the DNA of Americans. And so once the frontier was closed, we had to go elsewhere. We had to expand our role in the world. All right, that's all the planning. From there, you just start writing. All the pieces are in place, and if you follow this procedure and do it well, then you will be on your way to earning a good score on the DBQ. All right, that was a lot, and if you're still here after all of that, then thank you for sticking around, and I hope that was helpful. And if you need even more help on your essays, then click right over here, grab my AP Essay Cram course. And if you want more videos like this, then you can let me know by subscribing. Heimler out.